So, hi everyone. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. My name is Diego Pagliarulo, and I'm going to be the moderator of this session. I'm a contributor at OSMED, one of this program on Mediterranean affairs launched by Istituto di Studi Politici San Pio V, who is one of the organizers of this conference. We have a wonderful panel. I'll say a few more words about it. I also see that Professor Carteny is joining us from the United States, as far as I understand. Great to see you, Professor. And I would like to leave the floor to Professor Carteny for a moment so that he can greet us and say a few words. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you. I'm so glad to give my greeting address to our event. I'm visiting Fulbright here in this period, and I'm director of the CEMAS as a center of cooperation with the Mediterranean and Eurasia. So it is a very important, and I'm very glad to be part, that Sapienza is part of this great event about exploring contemporary Shi'ism in European and Middle Eastern context. So with the Professor Cereti and with our group of studies in Sapienza, we are focused on the cross-cultural and international studies in that sense, and through an interdisciplinary approach. I guess that is one of the most important issues. So I consider this conference a real big and interesting event, and with my colleague Francesca Angelone of Istituto San Pio V, we have all this field as one of the most important topics, not only in the research, also in didactics, and third mission, so cultural mission, to spread the knowledge on these topics within the society. So I'm delighted to give you my welcome, and with the Shirin Zakeri and the organization of you, Diego, I know that all our colleagues are very well organized to have the time of speech and debate. So please take my warm welcome and a good work for this event.
Okay, thanks very much, Professor Carteny. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. As I told you, my name is Diego Pagliarulo. I'm somewhat, let me just spend a few words to say what OSMED does. So just a few things. Unfortunately, Professor Angelone cannot join us, so I'm trying to recap very, very quickly what our program does, and then we move on with our panel. So OSMED is a program launched by a think tank, Istituto San Pio V here in Rome. Our job is largely to analyze Mediterranean affairs and try to produce documents and other pieces of research or articles and blogs that have the purpose of stimulating public debate in a rigorous way. So we try to be both accessible to a wider public and also somewhat rigorous in the way we use our sources and the way we used to present our points of view. We have a blog. You're all invited to check it out. We also produce dossiers every number of, at some kind of regular intervals. You are warmly invited to check our publications and our blog. And if you want also to contribute to our, all all our programs. So that said, I don't want to take too much time for to our speakers, because we have a wonderful panel, a very interesting panel. I want to thank Dr. Zaccheri for organizing and playing such an important part in setting all this program and this day of study up. And the first two panels have been outstanding for their the quality of the research, and this panel is no exception. Okay, we have a number of very distinguished speakers. We have very interesting papers or proposals to listen to. They are, as we have seen, we know that, we usually see the Shia world through the prism of Iran. We usually identify Shi'ism with Iran. Thanks to this day of study, we are somewhat broadening our scope, and we're noticing that Shi'ism goes somewhat beyond Iran, although Iran is such an important reference for Shia Muslim because of its history, because of the importance of the sites that the country hosts. But we have seen that there are Shia communities throughout what is commonly referred to as the broader Middle East. We have seen that there are important communities in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria. Other important communities are actually present in the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia most notably. Interestingly, the parts of Saudi Arabia where most of the oil is located are also populated by substantial Shia communities. Other parts of the Arab Peninsula, even Afghanistan has an important Shia community, the Hazaras. Then even beyond what is this broader Middle East, we have important Shia communities. So we have, for example, substantial Shia communities in North America, and even more significant communities in South America. And as we will be discovering this afternoon, we also have important Shia communities here in Europe, in Italy, Greece, and other parts of Europe. So our speakers will let us know more about these different communities, and our papers deal with very important issues such as creating, basically expressing your identity and understanding your identity in a context that is perhaps different from the traditional framework into which Shi'ism as a religion is expressed. So our speakers will deal with, creating sacred spaces where such spaces do not yet exist, expressing identity, relationship between different religious communities. And we also have a very interesting book review that deals with studies, gives us a panoramic of Shia studies in the West. So that's it for my introduction. We have a very interesting series of speakers, so I'd better leave them the floor as soon as possible. Our first speaker, I will go with the program as I see it. So our first speaker is Dr. Mirshahvalad. Sorry for, hope I pronounce it correctly. Forgive me for my Persian is not very well. I'm still practicing. Let's say I'm quite a beginner in this field. So, and our first speaker will tell us about the Shia communities here in Italy. So that's a very interesting topic. I look forward to listening to it. Just one practical piece of advice. I would recommend that we have a couple of hours in total I would recommend that we try to stay within 20 minutes so that we can leave the floor for, we have some spare time for questions and your answers. So try to stick to 20 minutes. I will reach out privately if for some reason you need a little more time, just to remind you the time. And so that said, Dr. Mirshahvalad, please, the floor is yours. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Diego. Now I'm gonna share my screen with you. So can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So as it has been just said, my paper is about the creating Shia sacred space in Italy. Actually, what I'm gonna present today is part of an extensive research that I conducted from 2016 to 2019 in 13 Italian cities. And it then later became part of a monograph that I published in November 2020 about Shias in Italy. And it was the first, so far the only study that has been done about Shias in this peninsula. Actually, what I'm gonna answer to is this question. I don't know if you can see the whole question. I'm going to answer, how do 12 Shias create sacred space in a place, in a country where the conventional places of prayer or prayer halls are absent? Actually, the answer to this question make the second chapter of my monograph. And I'm going to present, given the limits of time, I'm going to present a very brief overview of what I said in this second chapter of my book. The issue that we have in Italy is that the relation between non-Catholic religions, so religious minorities, with the Italian authorities in Italy, according to the Article 8 of the Constitution, is regularized through an instrument that is called intesa, and it means bilateral agreement, that the representatives of non-Catholic religions should conclude with the Italian Interior Minister in order to be recognized as religious entities and benefit from facilities envisaged for religious entities. Unfortunately, in Italy, so far, no Islamic organization has so far succeeded in reaching such an agreement with the Italian Interior Minister, and Shias have not yet presented any protocol or a draft of agreement to this minister. One of the bad consequences of the absence of such an agreement in Italy is that Shias are deprived of purpose-built mosques, and they do not have their conventional places of prayer. So, differently from other European countries that we, for instance, we heard in the previous panels, for instance, in the UK, that we heard that due to the wealth and due to the job opportunities that we have in the Northern European countries, they had become the destination of migrant influx, and also due to the sooner than the Southern European countries, and also due to the colonial background of the UK, we have a very strong presence of Shias from Indian subcontinent and Iraq in the UK. But we know that Italy has a very short period of colonialism in some North African countries that do not host Shia population, and so the Shia population in Italy is a very young phenomenon. And what we have in Italy, in the absence of mosques, are basements, warehouses, shops, garages, car showrooms, isolated factories on the outskirts of cities, or some dilapidated or abandoned structures that Shias take and adapt them for their liturgies. So to answer actually the question that I posted and I said earlier, I adopted qualitative methods, namely semi-structured interviews, observation, and ethnography. I was in 13 Italian cities and I interviewed around 89 people. And Shias in Italy are actually from these 4 nationalities. First of all, we have in Italy Pakistanis who are very devout, very active in their liturgies. Then we have Iranians, Lebanese, and Afghans. We have also some organizations founded by converts, Italian converts, and but other Shias, for instance, Shias from Latin America or North Africa, who are converted from Sunnism to Shi'ism or from other Christian denomination to Shi'ism, join the existing these 4 nationalities for important ceremonies or for weekly gatherings of Dua Kumail or Tawassul. And they do not have independent organizations. Even though we do not have, as I said, we do not have mosques, and the places, the unpretentious places of worship that we have in Italy cannot be considered sacred, neither from the point of view of the Islamic law, nor from the point of view of the Italian secular law. But as I was doing my interviews, I understood that almost all informants attributed some sort of hurma or words that have etymological roots with hurma, like ihtiram and muhtaram, to these places, these unpretentious places of their gathering. It means that despite the skepticism of scholars that who sometimes say that within the Islamic tradition we do not have sacred places, in this case, and I want to show through my paper that in the sense of the sacredness should be contextualized and understood in its own context and in its own case. So in Italy, we witness a different sort of sacredness. It is not a substantial type of sacredness, a sacredness that someone like Eliade would have said that it is a place of hierophany. It is a situational place of situational sacredness, which is created through the unwritten laws and conventions of the attendees of those places. So as I was conducting my observations, I actually listed the strategies that she has used to strategies of inclusion and exclusion of some phenomena within their places of gathering to attribute, to offer some sort of sacredness to these places. Due to time limits, I do not want to dwell on the inclusion elements, which are somehow familiar to all of us, because we are all, I suppose we are scholars of Shi'ism or Islam, or somehow we know these strategies. Instead, I want to dedicate the time that I have at my disposal to the elements that they exclude from these places, to actually prevent somehow the presence of the profane in these places, or at least what they consider as profane. The important point in these 3 strategies that I'm going to talk about is that the issue of the cultural, the so-called cultural, political, and national should be understood from the viewpoint of attendees and not from the viewpoint of us like observers. And it is important because I'm going to show you how these 3 categories are different from one Shia group to the other. All these, the first strategy actually include all those elements that have to do with instincts, appetites, ordinary life, and utilitarian aspects of the life that can somehow harm the universality, purity, and extraordinariness of the space. So somehow these strategies correspond to the Durkheimian's negative cult, namely those elements that should be removed before the entrance of the faithful in the place of worship. This strategy, the first strategy I mean here, is the most complicated measure of this list. It was not adopted with the same approach and the same frequency by all groups because the definition of these three threats, in quotes, to the sacredness of the space was different. Shias repelled what they considered political, national, and cultural. The presumed characteristics of community, namely love, freedom, trust, loyalty, respect, and care, as well as the sacredness of the space, were jeopardized in the presence of utilitarian and lie elements that could push the group towards formality and less fluid human interaction. Converse were in a specific concern about cultural, the category of cultural. They had created this mega category to through whatever they did not want from the elements of the from the religion to actually free themselves from these elements without running the risk of being accused of heresy. For instance, they were they were very different in their behavior regarding cultural and political. For instance, they were willing to commemorate the Quds Day, the liberalization of southern Lebanon, the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution within their headquarters, but they did not want to commemorate the Catholic Christmas and Easter, whereas the Shia-born groups and migrants were very willing to commemorate the Catholic celebrations either on the offline or online communities to show their respect for the host country, namely Italy. Usually non-religious, in quotes, events were held either outside the hall or in the profane areas of the headquarters, because almost all headquarters had some area that were dedicated to these events, and they were not dedicated to the performance of liturgies. For instance, in 2018, in the mid-August, as you know, it is the Pakistan Independence Day, and this Pakistani group had celebrated this day in a park. As another example, young Pakistanis in another city in Karpi, they tend to celebrate the Pakistan Independence Day or Pakistan Day in March 23rd as a sportive tournaments instead of celebrating them in their so-called Imam Bargas, or they tended to hold these celebrations or leave these celebrations for their embassies or their Sunni counterparts, their Sunni fellows who had a bigger Imam Bargas and could host all Shias regardless of their belonging to Islamic schools, Shias or Sunnis. These events normally generated some deformations in the normal order of the space, especially in terms of gender relations and gender segregation. Conversely to Pakistanis, for instance, in this explicitly Iran-backed organization, which is named Imam Ali Center in Milan, the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution was celebrated within the headquarters. And in this, both in 2018 and 2019, I observed that in this event, in these so-called cultural or national events, there was a very the normal gender segregation was abolished, and a very more fluid gender relation existed in these occasions. And women were present in colorful dresses in company of their husbands and other male participants. And in these occasions, much less restriction was applied to women's veil. And informants, all of them believed that in such so-called cultural occasions, there was less restriction was needed to be applied to women's veil. Conversely, to this Iranian-backed Shia center. Then we have this other organization, and this one is seated in Turin, and it is governed by Lebanese, and it is a multi-ethnic hall. And in this occasion, in December 2016, the Iranian Council came from Milan to Turin to hear the problems of Iranian students. And it was an exceptional and exceptional occasion which was exclusively Iranian meeting. And at that time, so in this multi-ethnic hall, any icon, any symbol that could have any explicitly political meaning was removed from this hall. When the Iranian Council came to visit, one of the then members of the executive committee put the Iranian flag, as you can see in this photo, and the photo of the Iran supreme leader and the photo of Ayatollah Khomeini on the table. As soon as the Iranian Council left the headquarters, this Iranian member of the executive committee removed these symbols because the presence of these markedly Iranian symbols could have provoked sensitivities of the Lebanese governors of this Shia organization. Sensitivity to politics, I observed in the context of diaspora, had concerned also the issue of marja'iyat, because in the context of diaspora, marja'iyat tended to become from a religious entity and religious institution to become a national emblem. For instance, I also noticed the presence of photos of Maraja in these headquarters. It was it was a Pakistani association in Karpi, and it is monoethnic and governed by Pakistanis. And I found the biggest photos of these three famous Maraja in their sacred part of their headquarters, which was a unique in its among Pakistanis, a unique case among Pakistanis. And then it was actually the inauguration of the first and only seminary of Italy in Carpi. And then differently from that, in this multi-ethnic Shia organization governed by converts in Rome, we have the photo of the same three marjas in this small dimension put in the profane part of their headquarters. And then in this Iranian-backed organization in Milan, we have the photo of the Iranian supreme leader with the Ayatollah Khomeini put almost in the same direction of mihrab, in the way that while praying, congregants could almost face both mihrab and these two photos. And as you can understand and imagine, it had a very strong political meaning. So the other, as I said earlier, the other strategy was the removal of carnal attraction, because people actually this strategy make Shia similar not only to Sunnis but also to proto-Christians and Jews. Because the faithful should be temporarily desexualized before entering the place of worship, and women are considered bearers of some sort of fitna or chaos, so that can threat the spirituality of men. So before the two main strategies are adopted to desexualize people before entering the place of worship. One of them is the veil, the other is gender segregation. The difference between these two strategies is the veil is limited to the veil is a meta phenomenon that actually marks the borders of the collective identity even outside of the place of worship, whereas the gender segregation is limited only to the walls of the prayer hall. But the issue with the gender segregation and also the veil is that similar to many other issues regarding women and family, these issues are more subject to urf or custom rather than the orthodoxy. Indeed, among Maraje, we do not, and in their manuals, we do not have a strict and clear norms regarding gender relation, apart from the norms of the collective prayer for which we have clear norms. But the gender relations within the worship places is more subject to customs. So it is why we see many different behavior among Shia communities in terms of gender relation. For instance, this one is the Iranian monoethnic hall in Milan. That you see there is a sort of fluid gender segregation in this hall. Then we have this Lebanese hall in Pavia, where even during a morning ceremony, women are without veil and gender segregation was almost absent. And then we have Pakistanis, very different country in terms of gender relation. They are very sensitive, like Afghans, to the issue of gender relations. And even when they did not have two different halls for men and women, they tended to use other objects like curtain to actually divide the space of the sexes in a restrict form. To actually, here on the third strategy is regarding the removal of shoes. Muslims, following the Jewish tradition, believe that wherever the presence of the sacred and God is perceived, they should remove their shoes. And this strategy is specifically important, especially in a context like Italy and in the West in general, where houses are bereft of carpet. So the people know when they enter in a place that they should remove their shoes. They can perceive the difference of the space, because actually the sacred space should be a rapture in the normal and ordinary secular life. And I want to share with you two episodes that show the importance of shoe removal for the sacredness of the space. One is this one, and I was in a Pakistani organization, and a Majlis had just finished, and they had put this so-called coffin of Imam Sajjad in a tiny room, and they had fabricated this coffin in Carpi. And I wanted to enter this tiny room to photograph it. And as soon as I wanted to enter this room, a girl arrived and admonished me that I had to take off my shoes. Initially, I thought that perhaps she was saying it because they would go there to perform religious rituals. But then when I opened the door, I understood that the room was so much tiny and small that no human being apart from this coffin could stood there. So I understood the only object that had best of sacredness to that space was this coffin, the so-called coffin, and shoe removal had become important because of its presence. The other episode was when I was in this Lebanese, actually in the space of Lebanese, that they had actually rented the underground of a Catholic parish in Pavia because they did not have fixed headquarters. And even when I was there, at a certain moment, 3 Iranian unveiled girls arrived, and they asked me, where is the mosque? And I said, what are you talking about? And they said they had just arrived from Iran, and they had seen this. They had seen the crowd outside of the parish, and there some Lebanese boys who had grown up in Italy had told them that there was a mosque in that place. So the girls was looking for a mosque, and then I understood what had happened. Actually, Lebanese had, for the first 10 days of Muharram, had Shia-sized this parish for the commemoration of the Karbala tragedy with these flags here. And for the Lebanese boys who had grown up in Italy, this place had become a mosque, but it could not be the same for the Iranian girls who had just arrived from Iran. I want to underline two things with this episode. First is that the manner in which people perceive the sacredness and the sense of the place where they enter in a context like Italy depends very much on the place where they have grown up. And the other issue is that where some strategies like the women's veil that I said that it is very important, and the removal of shoes are absent in a space like this, the borderline of the space tend to become blurry and vague, and people like Iranian girls tend to be confused. They cannot understand whether they are in the mosque or not. So to wrap up very at the end, okay. The points that I wanted to make here is, first of all, the sacredness of the place should be, as I said earlier, should be contextualized and understood in its own context. So, as I said, these places were very sacred for their attendees, even though they could not be sacred. They could not be understood as sacred for the Orthodoxy. The other point is that the arbitrary nature of the sacred space causes a redefinition of the sacred and the profane boundaries. And then we witnessed difference in understanding the sacred and the profane from one group to another. The other point is that the sacredness of the space in the absence of mosque is a fruit of human convictions and not what Orthodoxy perceive for the sacredness. And it is a very important evolution in terms of making the sacred space. So we have different levels of sacredness depending on the levels of the adoption of the strategies that I mentioned in this paper. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dr. Mirshahvalad. That was